Good evening. It is 7:01, and I will call the March 5th meeting of the Essex Planning Board to order. We are scheduled to have a public hearing to review the articles that the Planning Board is proposing for annual town meeting on May 5th. And that is scheduled to start at 7:15. So we are going to take care of some Planning Board business until 7:15 when we'll start that hearing. So thank you for your patience, and we will open that shortly. We don't have anything from the building inspector this evening, and he's not going to be joining us tonight. There's nothing on the agenda for him. So let's just go ahead and review the minutes from the 19th. That makes for fascinating watching, I'm sure, but we'll get that out of the way now.
Can I say something?
Sure.
In the minutes, I do have an edit. I confirmed with Mr. Guerin the address that he'd prefer to use, so I will strike the address that's in there and insert the one that he has. That's the only edit.
Everyone set with minutes? Any comments, changes? So we'll approve them with the one edit that Teresa mentioned regarding the address. So I'll take a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Thank you, Matt. Second?
Second.
Peter, thank you. All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Oh, and Simone abstains.
Thank you.
Do you, Teresa, want to talk about the fee schedule? We have a couple minutes.
Yep.
Still.
So my second update tonight is the work on the revision of the fee schedule.
Yeah.
Thank you. My second update tonight is continue to work on the revised fee schedule. As a reminder, our current fee schedule dates back to 2013. We've been talking about this for a while. In our last meeting, we talked about some of the considerations that we need to take when doing so. So I've created a one-pager. I met with Lisa yesterday. I did see your notes that will be worked in a different way. So just so you know, the things we're trying to accomplish here with this revision would be to make sure that fees are covering the cost of the required notifications, also offsetting administrative costs to the town, utilize that revolving account for accountability, and making sure that anything beyond those notification balances gets into the general fund. So what I'm bringing to you after comping out fee schedules with local towns, which you can look at this at your leisure, it has my notes, comping out what we have with other local towns of similar size. What I am proposing to accomplish this is that we have the fee structure set into two parts, an application fee and a notification fee. The application fee, of course, is subjective, but it is appropriate to recuperate some of those administrative costs that Val noted in our last meeting. And the issue before was kind of that, how would this work for process? Because we have to process the application in our unique circumstances with our small town hall. So what I would suggest is that the application fee be collected when the application is submitted, then deposited into the planning board revolving fund by me, the admin. Then I process the application for whatever the action is that's being requested. And if notifications are required, like for a public hearing, I'll make those notifications and then create basically a bill, an itemized list of what the costs are, that will be sent to the applicant, and basically the hearing or whatever action requiring those notifications doesn't take place until that's paid. So I will deal with that in the interim. That also goes into the revolving account. And then once, my suggestion is that once the planning board's action on that given project is complete, so for instance, if it's a special permit, once we've gone through the process, you've voted, a decision has been made, and the appeals period has ended, we've provided final docs for the applicant to file with the Registry of Deeds, then at that point, I create basically a final accounting of the project. This is not as big a deal as it sounds when I say it out loud like that. Provide it to the applicant, but then turn over the balance of the combination of those two fees to the general fund. So the town is getting the money to offset the incidental costs that you can't really count in a direct way that way, but we're also able to maintain accountability in our fee structure. So that's really the proposal that I'm coming with. Looking at the fees, I do have on the back of this page, we can really simplify this by quite a lot. The fee structure, because it hasn't been updated in so long, in some cases isn't even in alignment with our bylaw. So it's really possible at this time to take the opportunity to really simplify this. Special permit, site plan review, there's not a big difference in administrative cost at this time to doing those things. We take in the application, we run the meeting, aside from the notification. So the application fee itself, I'm just throwing out a number to you of $150 for the application fee. Keeping in mind that the notices fee is gonna be probably over $300. The Gloucester Daily Times estimate, it's roughly around $300 that we end up paying to publish those notifications for public hearings. So that's going to be on top of this, which is why I'm suggesting we reduce that number from $250 to $150, because this is just a straight on top of that as the application fee. Same thing for the site plan review. I also would recommend that we just narrow it down from all four of those options to just one site plan review fee, because again, in the event that a public hearing is required, like for the change of use situation that's now in our bylaw, we're going to have the notification fee separate, so we don't have to worry about all these different options. In terms of the subdivision options, the approval not required, preliminary plan, and definitive plan, I would suggest we keep those at the same structure that they are, which is $250 per lot. For A&R, it's $250 flat plus $250 per new lot created. And prelim and definitive are $250 per lot. When I comped it out, every town has a different structure for how they set up their fee for subdivisions, and some of them are really intensive. So I basically did a test run with the Essex Reach Road possible proposal to comp out where we would fall in comparison to those. And we're kind of right in the middle high of the range, but if you keep in mind that you don't have to submit a preliminary plan, we're actually in the lower end of the range. So it seems reasonable, since we're not really doing a ton of these, to just keep that as is right now. I don't have any reason to suggest that, with the exception, again, that the notifications fee would be in addition to that. So any public hearing notices would be added on top of that. It works process-wise. I'm seeing it simplified. If you guys are in support of this, feel free to discuss the numbers, whatever you think. But if you are in support, I do know that with the town meeting vote to create these revolving accounts for Planning Board, ZBA, and Concom, Conservation Commission, town administrators hoping to have everyone have any updates in place for the new fiscal year for July 1st. Rules and regulations changes do require a public hearing, so we're hoping to piggyback on a possible additional public hearing for April 16th. So I know we're in process with a whole rules and regulations revision, but I don't think that's going to go quite so quickly. So my recommendation would be that you guys really discuss this as a proposal. If you like the idea and the concept and you're good with some of the numbers, I can bring back what it would actually look like with the language that goes with it, as you've already started in the appendix draft. And we'd look for a vote to recommend that at the March 19th meeting, and then would bring it forth at the public hearing, and then after the public hearing, you could vote to approve.
And so,
Just all that.
would we spell out all of the information on the cost plus in that section as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we can, I just wanted Teresa to go over this because it's going to take a little thought. So we can come back with questions after the public hearing if we want to talk about it some more. And we can also put it back on the agenda for the 19th, where we probably want to make some decisions at that point. So we're not going to be trying to make decisions on this tonight. We'll do that on the next meeting on the 19th. But now you have information to look at and think about.
Thanks, Teresa.
Yeah, thank you.
It is almost 7:15.
I do have one quick question. Why does it go back in the general fund as opposed to just our fund, or is that the same?
Because the general fund is where the town gets to spend its money from. So for instance, postage is paid out of the general fund. All of the other ancillary costs, like any work through the assessor's office, that's what that administrative application fee that really would start to cover. The revolving account is really intended to zero out so that the board has a reason to prioritize accountability and keeping the fee structure current.
All right, it is 7:15. So I will take a motion to open the public hearing for the zoning articles that the planning board will be bringing to annual town meeting on May 5th. So I take a motion to open the hearing.
Make a motion to open the public hearing.
Thank you, Matt. Second.
Second.
Simone seconds. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. This meeting is being broadcast by 1623 Studios and is being recorded. The planning board operates under the provisions of the Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 40A zoning, Chapter 30A, and the open meeting law, and the Town of Essex bylaws, Chapter 6 on zoning. Notifications of this public hearing were published in the Gloucester Daily Times on January 31st and on February 7th, 2025, and this satisfies the requirements for adoption or change of zoning ordinances or bylaws found in MGL Chapter 48, Section 5. In order to conduct this hearing in the most effective manner, our process is as follows. We will consider each article for consideration at town meeting individually. First, each article will be described, referencing the town meeting warrant. Second, planning board members will have an opportunity to ask any questions and then to provide any comments. Third, attending members of the public will have an opportunity to ask questions, which the board will answer as necessary and appropriate. Fourth, attending members of the public will have an opportunity to provide comments. The board will not vote on the proposed articles this evening. The board will engage in a discussion tonight following the close of the public hearing. Input we receive during this public hearing will inform the board's further discussions tonight and at our next meeting on March 19th. These discussions may lead to additional modifications to the proposed articles. The planning board will vote on the proposed articles at the March 19th meeting, then send to the Board of Selectmen for approval as part of the town meeting warrant. The chair or the designee will recognize speakers and may set time limits if necessary. The open meeting law requires that you provide your name and address when recognized to speak. Please confine questions and comments to the articles under consideration and to matters that are under the jurisdiction of this board. Although we may disagree on the issues raised, everyone present at this meeting is expected to be civil to all others present. Those who do not act in a civil manner or engage in rude or disruptive behavior will be asked to leave. In addition, we ask that citizens inform themselves of the provisions of the laws under which this board operates, particularly the Essex zoning bylaw. Copies of the zoning bylaw can be obtained through Town Hall, and the full town bylaw is available on the town website. Copies of the applicable Massachusetts general laws can be found online at www.mass.gov and by searching for the relevant sections therein. That said, I do want to provide a few more clarifications about our process and schedule and intentions moving forward. Tonight, we're going to be talking about 7 articles that were advertised, like I said, on January 31st and February 7th, as being proposed at town meeting, or will be proposed at town meeting. However, we are also looking at adding 2 more articles to the town meeting warrant. And we're not going to talk about those tonight, but I did want to make people aware that this is not the only public hearing that we'll be having. We will be advertising the 2 additional articles. Soon. And at this point right now, the way our schedule looks, just to keep everyone informed and aware of how we're operating, is that we're holding this public hearing tonight. As I said in my statement, we'll be discussing these articles based on any public comment that we get, again, 2 weeks from tonight on March 19th, at which point we will be finalizing the articles that we'll be bringing to town meeting. The selectmen are planning to sign the warrant on the 24th, so we have to have things finalized 2 weeks from tonight. We're also going to be talking about 2 more articles, which we will be finalizing as a board by the 19th so that they can appear on the warrant for the 24th. The public hearing on those 2 articles will take place on our second meeting in April, which is April 16th. So there will be another public hearing regarding warrant articles to address the 2 additional that we're considering. In addition, if we make any changes to the articles presented tonight that town council deems to be substantial enough to require rehearing, we would also rehear those articles at that meeting on April 16th. We don't expect that that's necessary, but we'll be checking with town council. If we make revisions to what was originally advertised and what's been presented to you this evening in the handouts, and what we ultimately put on the warrant for the 24th. So just want to be clear and transparent about that. If we do make substantial changes, it will be back in front of you 6 weeks from tonight. Got all that? That said, we will start with the articles that we'll be bringing to town meeting. I'm going to follow the order that's in the handout. we will be reorganizing the presentation order in the warrant. So all the articles remain the same, but we're going to be putting them in a different order. For tonight, I'm going to stick with the order that's in the handout. So the first article, which on our handout is called Planning Board 1, since we don't have the warrant numbering yet, regards changes to the bylaw that are non-substantive, in that we'll be making corrections to standardized spelling, punctuation, spacing, capitalization, grammar, and other errors like that, such as putting in the correct spelling for a principal with a IPLE versus IPAL, standardizing the formatting as far as what's in boldface, what's underlined, and the indentations and things like that. So we're not changing any of the language, we're just reformatting the document essentially. We're going to be standardizing the references to Mass General laws so that we have a consistent format for that. And then there are also cross-references within the bylaw to other portions of the bylaw, so we'll be double-checking those and correcting them if necessary. Some of that, there was a few things that didn't make it when we reformatted the whole bylaw with our new structure. There's a couple of references that didn't quite make it. The reason for presenting this as a bylaw, as an article at town meeting, is that even though these are the kind of changes that the town clerk could make for us with the approval of the selectmen, in that situation, those changes need to be entered as a footnote into the document. And with the amount of changes that we want to do just to clean the document up, it would add a lot of footnotes, and that gets incredibly cumbersome. So we thought we'll sort of do a once through the whole bylaw and try and catch all these things and bring it as an article. So again, it's non-substantive. There are no changes to the meaning or the intent of the bylaw. It's really just cleaning up the document. Planning board members, any questions or comments on that?
No.
Members of the public, questions or comments? Mr. Guerin, if you want to come to the microphone because we're being recorded, and then you need to do your name and address too, please.
John Guerin, 16 Belcher Street. Last meeting, we were talking about the erection of more than one principal structure on a lot, and the word housing in the first sentence is a lowercase h. And my point with your fixing things, a capital H might have had a different meaning than a lowercase h. So I think whatever it is you're planning to fix needs to have the bolds and the cross-outs and everything so we know what you're doing, because I don't want it to change the meaning. And there's a perfect example of one of them.
Right.
That's all I have to say.
No, thank you. And we will be prepared. Yeah, that's what we're preparing. Yeah. All right. Second article. Second article is on accessory dwelling units, which are not currently permitted in Essex under our current bylaw. However, new state regulations that went into effect on February 2nd do allow ADUs in the state by right. The way the state law is written, it's in single-family districts, which is not something that we have, but our general use district certainly qualifies, and Canoma Point districts as well as single-family districts. So we have added a section to the bylaw to address accessory dwelling units, and we're providing a couple of stipulations that are in addition to what the state regulation allows. So the state regulation, I don't want to say supersedes this, but the state regulation tells you what is sort of the minimum, and it also provides the guidelines for what municipalities can put into their own bylaws to nuance what the state has allowed as general. So the state has allowed ADUs that are 900 square feet or smaller, or it's in our definitions, because we at last town meeting added the definition for ADUs, which includes It's half the gross floor area of the principal dwelling or 900 square feet, whichever is smaller. The definition that we already have established for accessory dwelling unit talks about what defines an accessory dwelling unit, and also about the regulations regarding town sewer and/or septic systems that you would need to comply with. So what's included in the new bylaw section that is being proposed are some caveats that are, first, that the accessory dwelling unit shall not be used for short-term rentals as defined by the Commonwealth. And the reference has been added, so there's, in the second handout, there's a handout with the articles that dated January 31st, and then there's a second handout with some changes that have been made, and the reference to the state regulation, the state definition is included there. We are requiring that accessory dwelling units shall meet the setback requirements of the zoning district of the principal dwelling, whether attached or detached. And accessory dwelling units shall meet the requirements and/or not exceed the limitations provided in section 6-2 definitions, including any and all other applicable town regulations. That's what's in here so far, and to clarify that we're also going to continue to modify this. We talked about at our last planning board meeting some other requirements that we would want to put in here. And one is that we are going to require or clarify that accessory dwelling units will be allowed one per lot. And the reason for doing this is in Essex, we have in our bylaw a provision that allows multiple single-family dwellings on a lot. So if you have a 70,000 square foot lot, you can have 2 principal dwellings, and if you have 110,000 square feet, you can have 3 principal dwellings. And our intent is to allow still just 1 ADU per lot, not 1 ADU per house in a situation like that. So we will be amending this, what's presented here to you, before we bring it to the selectmen. And we'll be working on that language this evening and next meeting on the 19th to add that into the article language. And then we're also going to add another requirement that would require a special permit for the condition where someone wants to convert an existing accessory building, like a garage or a barn or something, into an accessory dwelling unit where that is a non-conforming structure. So our requirement is that if you're building a new ADU, you have to meet the zoning setbacks of the district that you're in for the original house, for a dwelling there. But we have different setbacks for accessory buildings, so it's very likely that a garage could have been built closer to a lot line than a house would have been allowed to. And if you're going to convert a garage that does not meet the setbacks for a single-family home, and you want to convert it into an ADU, then that's going to require a special permit. So those are the 2 things that we had talked about at our last meeting, and we will be adding to the language for this article when we bring it to the selectmen after our next meeting on the 19th. So that's the gist of that. Planning board members, any questions or comments on that?
You saw the spelling error?
Hmm?
You saw the extra word in
Is what?
the extra word, whether attached or detached.
Where is that? I'm sorry.
Whether attached or detached.
Oh, the whether or, yeah, the extra or in there.
You didn't read it,
Okay,
so I
yeah.
thought you saw it.
Yep. Gotcha. Members of the public, questions or comments? I mean, you might as well come up with both. There's not that many of you this evening. So approach the microphone and name and address and questions or comments, please.
Hi, my name is Constance Vallis. I live at 7 Western Ave. My question is, currently, short-term rentals have been allowed if you have attached them to the main structure. So will we be able to continue renting those units under this guideline?
Do we allow short-term rentals?
Do we, is this for an in-law apartment that we're talking about? Because the ADU,
I'm not
It-
sorry, who's speaking?
Sorry, Val, our town planner, is on
Oh.
Zoom, so she's remote.
I'm looking, whose mouth is moving? Go ahead, sorry.
Go ahead, Val, sorry.
well, I was just questioning, because you're saying that they haven't been allowed in the past. So are we talking about an in-law apartment, which would be regulated differently?
No, in a short-term rental.
So I think it depends on how it was created, but right now, we're not looking at it as something that's a new accessory dwelling unit. So I don't expect that there'd be any changes to an existing situation.
So if they're pre-existing, these, so if you have, my question also is that I've been confused about the attachment that is required by the Water and Sewer Department of the town, that they have said that in order to create short-term rentals, they have to be connected, but the new ADU laws are saying they can be detached. And that's, if they're detached, they can't be short-term and they can only be in-laws?
Well, no, I guess what I'm wondering is whether you have a second dwelling unit as an attached. So like, this is a new state law.
Right. But if it's
And-
detached,
It can be attached or detached under this new state law. But that doesn't always work with the Essex Sewer Department and Water, because it's going to depend on each individual house.
so they're
How-
going house by house?
It has to be done that way because of the capacity that might have been designed into the house.
Right. There, right now, I have an accessory dwelling that's detached, that has water and sewer. And when I've spoken to the Water Sewer Department, the superintendent has said that there's plenty of flow for sale now, so it shouldn't be an issue.
Okay. But it's pre-existing, so it's something that you had created before this new state law went into effect. So you don't need to worry about what this zoning will do, because you have something that's pre-existing.
Oh, okay.
And whatever, the way we've defined accessory dwelling units, which is already in the bylaw, it does refer to the sewer and septic limitations in town, and that just because the state allows ADUs doesn't mean that you get to bypass our septic and sewer regulations, essentially. So you still need to meet that. And the way the sewer system works is that you need to have a connected, a hard connection between the house and the ADU to be able to tie into the sewer. So if you were on sewer and you wanted to have an ADU and couldn't tie it in, you would need to put that on septic, is how that works.
That's for new ones only.
That's the new, right, yeah, and so that's what this, when we put a bylaw in place like this, it's for anything that comes from this time on. The bylaw doesn't immediately revert retroactively to existing properties in town, so that's just not how this, this
Okay.
works.
It's all new territory, so I'm just trying to be clear, because it says, as defined by the 760 CMR 71. I guess I can look that up when I go home.
Well, the state has a regulation that defines, so that regulation is brand new.
Oh, okay, so that is, okay.
And that's new, and that's going with this new law. And they're basically saying that for these new ADUs that the state law is allowing, that a short-term rental has to meet a certain definition of the state law. but it's all for only new stuff. It won't
Pardon?
affect any, it's only for new,
Only for new
Construction.
construction. Is that what she's saying? Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's for
Correct,
new stuff.
Not pre-existing.
Like I talked about though, is if a person had an existing structure that's a garage or a barn and they wanted to turn that into an ADU, then these regulations would apply to that.
Would not apply.
Would apply
Would
because it's a
apply.
new use for that structure. If you
Okay.
make your barn into an ADU,
Right.
you're basically resetting the baseline that you work from, and you would need to comply with the guidelines here. Like I talked about, and we will be adding the one that says if you have a non-conforming structure that you want to convert into an ADU, it would be through the special permit process.
And what do you mean by non-conforming?
If your barn is 10 feet off your lot line and our side setback is 20 feet for a single-family dwelling, and we're requiring that an ADU meet those same setbacks, that means your barn does not meet the house setbacks. And then if you want to convert a barn that is non-conforming because it doesn't meet that setback, then that would be a special permit.
Well, what if the front had 25, I believe it's 25 feet from in the front, and maybe the same other side, or 30 or something?
It's whatever standards apply in the district that the house is. So the ADU has to meet those same setbacks that a
Right.
house would.
And if they do, then that's a non-issue.
I'm sorry?
And if they do meet that
Right,
requirement,
it's a non-issue.
non-issue.
That's a by right.
Good. Great, thank you for your time.
Sure, thank you. Other questions, comments? Brendan?
I am Brendan Zubricki, Town Administrator, and I think I can help clarify some of the discussion that just occurred.
That would be appreciated.
Yes, so in Essex, when the sewer system was installed, or constructed, it was a pollution abatement measure. It was not intended to be a measure that would allow for new growth in the town of Essex. And that's because the town was in violation of both the state and a federal consent decree with respect to wastewater pollution to the environment. And so the reason why the Board of Public Works has never allowed a new structure to be built on a property and then be connected to the sewer is because that would be allowing growth. They do allow expansion, and that's why we're talking about the connection of something that's built to an existing structure. Now, with respect to a structure that was perhaps not a habitable structure previous to someone wanting to convert it to a habitable structure, the same thing applies. It didn't exist as a habitable structure is the same thing as it didn't exist at all. And so whether you want to build something new or you want to take something and repurpose it, in both instances, they have to be connected to the main structure. And again, that's because it's a pollution abatement measure, the sewer system that we have. With respect to a building that has a particular use in it right now, which could be that it's being used for habitation, it has to be lawfully pre-existing in order for that use to carry on in the future. So I don't think it has to do as much with the use just pre-existing. It has to be lawfully
Lawful
pre-existing.
pre-existing.
Just because you started to use something in a certain way, if it's found out later that what you're doing wasn't lawfully arrived at, that doesn't provide grandfathering or vesting rights.
Correct.
Are there
Yes.
any other questions on that?
No, that makes sense, and I appreciate you explaining that, and that's important.
Thank you.
And Bill has reinforced that pre-existing condition or situation is only allowed if it was lawful at the time it was done. Any other questions, John? Comments?
Couple of things. As this applies again to 6-7.1, erection of more than one principal structure on a lot with ADUs, 671 says, provided that they house in the aggregate no more than 3 dwelling units. If we are adding an ADU to a property that's 110,000 square feet and already has a duplex and a single family, there's already 3 dwelling units on the property. If you add an ADU, now you've got 4. And it won't comply with 671 if you're allowing an additional unit, a 4th unit on the property. So the board has to make a decision where they want to come out, whether they're going to say our unique bylaw that allows up to 3 houses on a single lot, whether they want to say that means 4 now. Because I think, and what I tried to say at the last meeting was that the ADU addition should not apply to a lot that already has 3 units on it. Now, also, if somebody's got 1 unit and they've got an ADU, I'm sorry, let's say they have a 2-family and they add an ADU, and then they want to come back and ask you for another house, because then it's not the ADU being added, it's another house being added. So what is it? We have to decide.
Can I address that point?
Sure.
The regulations don't allow the town to consider these ADUs under the density of the bylaw. So what you just described can't be done.
So we can't, even though we allow 3 principal dwellings on a 110,000 square foot lot, we can't exclude a 4th dwelling that is an ADU? Is that what you're saying, Val?
Yes, that's what the regulations say.
Then what I'm saying is our bylaw that allows up to 3 principal dwellings, if you put an ADU in, you can't put in another principal dwelling. So the ADU is allowed, but you can't put a 3rd principal dwelling in, because then you'd be in violation of 671, where you only have the right to have 3.
But then that's counting it as density. I
No,
don't
no,
believe,
I'm talking
this is a
about
question for,
a new principal dwelling.
yeah, but I think this
The
should be
cart
brought to
before the
council,
horse.
but I believe that counting the ADU towards density in the zoning bylaw is expressly not allowed by the regulations that are in place.
And is 6-71 erection of more than one principal house on a lot, a density zoning lot?
That's based on density, yes.
So does the town want to consider making a change to that?
Making a change to 6-71.
I mean, if there's an ADU already there and restricted to 3 units, if you're going to have an ADU. There was no intent ever to allow, the whole idea of this bylaw in the first place, the erection of more than one principal dwelling, was to allow the kids that grew up in town to be able to have a piece of dad's back 40, because we don't have enough frontage and we don't want to do a subdivision. We're allowing to have this 3rd home, 2nd and 3rd home. For the state to come in here and tell us that we've got to have 4 when we already have more than what we've ever, any other town does. There has to be an adjustment here. And again, I think, yes, if you have 3 units there, then if Val's correct, and then you want to put an ADU in, you can do that. But if you have an ADU and you want to put another house, this board probably should deny that.
I think that has to go to town council, whether that's allowable, because that would mean that you're counting the ADU as part of the density on the lot.
So to clarify, the issue is if you have a lot that would allow 3 single-family homes and you only have 2, and you build an ADU, now you have 3 principal dwelling structures.
It's not even principal, provided that they house in the aggregate no more than 3 dwelling units. Not structures even. It could be a 2-family and a single family. That's 3.
Right.
But if you had 3 houses on the site already and you wanted to add an ADU, that would be within your right.
according to what Val is telling us here and what the state's forcing upon us, even though the town has already gone way out of their way and has a bylaw that no other town has.
Right, and the way the state law was intended was for single-family districts, so their intent was to apply this to properties that had a single family on it, not to apply it to properties that had 2 or 3 single families or a 2-family and a single family, something like that. So I understand what you're saying, and I think we need to get some clarity from town council around this to understand,
Or even the
because,
state before May,
I'm sorry?
or even the state before May.
Because we do have a unique situation with that, so,
And my,
Let-
and my other point, I'll just want to move on, because you know what I feel on that, unless you want, I didn't mean to interrupt, did you have?
no,
The other thing on B, accessory dwelling unit shall meet the setback requirements of the zoning district of the principal dwelling. It's either the zoning district or the principal dwelling, or both, but I think if I've got a dwelling on one side of my property, and the way it's written right now, I want to go within, and it's 5 feet away from the property line, right now I can continue that nonconformity, even if I add on to that house. And I understand maybe that's your intent with an ADU. You can go to that extent, but not further in that nonconformity. But the way it's read right here, if I'm 5 feet off the line here, what's to stop me going from 5 feet off the line on the other side without making this spelled out and very clear what that means? It means you can't expand the nonconformity more than the current nonconformity in line with it the way it's always been read, but it doesn't say that. So I think that language needs to be either the zoning district, which means 25-foot fronts or 30-foot rear and 20-foot sidelines,
right,
or it means the dwelling unit. So I think you mean both, but it doesn't say that.
you think we mean both?
I think you mean, you should mean, maybe in my opinion, you should mean, you gotta meet the zoning district,
Right,
or if there's a nonconformity there, you can continue that nonconformity but not increase that nonconformity. And that's not what it says. It says the setback requirements of the zoning district of the principal dwelling. So that talks about the zoning district, not
right,
where the dwelling is sitting in that district, not the building itself. So it just needs clarity on what your intent is here, because it's not clear.
okay,
And I don't think it's right to have somebody who has 5 foot off of this line decide they want to put an ADU 5 foot off of that one.
that's certainly not our intent, it's to meet the zoning setbacks of the district, not,
So I'll wait for the last thing when we get to the next article. Thank you.
yeah, we'll definitely discuss this language further, either this evening after the hearing, if we have time, or at our next meeting on the 19th, and I will also be reaching out to council to try and clarify that, to make sure that we're saying explicitly what we intend to, which also, we need to talk about that with respect to the nonconformity of an accessory building that someone wants to convert. So we just need to add a little more clarity around this. But thank you, John. Anyone else, comments or questions on ADUs? Seeing none, we will move to the next article, which is a pretty much complete overhaul of our floodplain overlay district, which is required because of changes in the FEMA maps. And I am going to turn this over to Brendan. He's been working very hard on this with DCR and FEMA and whoever else to get the language for this correct.
Thank you. Again, Brendan Zubricki, Town Administrator. There is a program known as the National Flood Insurance Program, and most communities in the United States participate in it. Essex is one of them. In order to remain eligible for participation in the National Flood Insurance Program, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, requires the participatory community to agree to adopt changes in flood insurance rate maps. So those are the flood maps that you see from time to time. And flood insurance study reports, which is the technical backing behind those maps. In addition, FEMA requires participatory community to keep its floodplain bylaw in compliance with the standards that FEMA has set down. And they've become increasingly more complex over the years. So we've reached another point in time when FEMA, once again, is updating flood maps, and they're also requiring changes to the regulatory structure in the town, which is the floodplain bylaw. And so this proposed article is basically something that we had to have our existing floodplain bylaw reviewed by the state agent for FEMA in Massachusetts, which is the Department of Conservation and Recreation, DCR. DCR handles the process, and they've actually reviewed our existing bylaw. They have made suggestions to change the existing bylaw in accordance with a very complicated document that FEMA developed. We then had that reviewed by town council and our town planner, and all the comments that came out of that review went back to DCR. DCR has now approved everything that we've got, and it's ready to go. It's very specific. There really isn't a lot of leeway involved with respect to these changes. The flood insurance rate maps that are proposed for change, which will go effective July 8th, 2025, there are copies of them back here, but they're available on FEMA's website. And in the article, we're going to make sure when it hits the warrant that everyone can get to that, because it's kind of hard to negotiate. And we're going to say a link to the versions of the FIRM, flood insurance rate map, and the FIS, flood insurance study, as they currently appear on the Federal Emergency Management Agency website, is available at the town's website at essexma.org under the town meeting tab on the home page, which will be updated from time to time if changes are made. Then in a parenthetical, we're going to say, once at the FEMA page, open the preliminary products folder, and you may download and view FIRM panels, and we list them out. There are 7 of them, and all 6 flood insurance study reports. And so that way, somebody reading the warrant can actually get to the FEMA site and then zero in on the actual flood panels, because if you pull up Town of Essex, it pulls up Essex County, and there's 148 flood panels. So we're talking about the 7 specific panels, and those are the ones that are there, and the 6 volumes of flood insurance study documents that are there. So generally, that's it. It's a requirement to stay in compliance with the National Flood Insurance Program that we want to be able to continue to have residents of Essex partake in if they so desire. Are there questions about that?
Planning board members or members of the public, if there are questions? John?
To Brendan?
Yeah.
It's
Yep.
fine. When we've done this in the past, and Brendan and I have been through this before, where we actually had a town meeting, vote this down, and then we had to come back at another town meeting in order so people could actually get their flood insurance. When we discovered those maps at that time, the maps themselves were, in some cases, 2 feet difference in height, which brought in hundreds of homes in town into the flood zone that weren't in the flood zone initially. Has the town had the opportunity, and when they were given the opportunity, did they review these maps with anybody that knew what they were doing? And I don't mean that facetiously, but to determine whether we're in the same situation. When I read elevation 13 quickly on some of these, when, what was it, 10 years ago, 8 years ago?
Something like
5 years ago? They were 2 feet lower. It was 11 feet. And now suddenly it's 13 feet, and, you know, everybody's talking about global warming and that type of thing. But it's exactly the same number they came in with the first time before we refuted it and said, you forgot about Hog Island, you forgot about the marsh, you forgot about Cranes Beach, all defenders of Essex. And they had us out there as if we were straight open to the ocean. Now, admittedly, I look out at the water and I see that Cranes Beach has come down, and I see Canomo Point being affected more than it used to be. But inland, not 2 feet. And that's what I'm seeing now, and I don't know whether that's been, I don't want to go to town meeting again and argue against this thing. The last question is, when we've changed this in the past, we've changed the first paragraph on this page. Now suddenly we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pages that I've never seen before tonight. And is that stuff that's recommended, or are they forcing it down our throats that we have to have it? And under what authority are they saying that we have to have it? That's my question.
Okay, thank you.
With respect to the first question, when the flood maps were updated the time before this, there was quite a bit of discussion amongst the communities in the area that the methodology that was used, and it had to do with the transects that FEMA chooses, was something that is applicable in certain situations, but not in a situation like what we have here in Essex. And so at that time, among other communities, Essex actually engaged the services of a consultant to go through a formal process, and we did prevail, and there was a change in the elevation, which helped a lot of people. In this case, we are not hearing that same thing. What we're hearing this time is, since this pass at the maps is what they would describe taking full advantage of best available information on sea level rise and storm surge, that this is more accurate. Now, what I can do along those lines is I can check in with that very same consultant, and I can advise the planning board between now and town meeting specifically as to whether the same type of logic and argument is being made today. I don't think it is. I think it's because of different reasons, but I can find that out, okay? The other part is all of the extra language and sections that you didn't see in our bylaw before. Where are those coming from? As I mentioned when I described the process at the outset, that is coming from very specific guidance that FEMA put out. In fact, they provided like a guidebook. Fortunately, and it's very complicated and hard to understand. Fortunately, DCR was able to help us look at every new component that was required and help us put in the things that in this pass are now required in a new sense. So my answer to that is yes, they're required. And in fact, we've been told by DCR that if anything changes, we need to go back to them because it could invalidate what gets adopted if we have other changes that we want them to consider. So I'll do this on that score. I will go back to DCR and I'll ask Eric Carlson straight out. Our understanding is what you've provided to us is a hard and fast requirement, and I will get the confirmation. I believe he's going to say that's the case. And I'll check with the consultant on the difference in why there might be increases in the elevation this time versus last. I don't think it's a methodology thing. So I'll do that and I'll report back.
Okay, thank you. John?
The last time the town missed the opportunity to do it on FEMA's nickel. Are we still, have we passed that, and do we have to pay this out of pocket? We ended up putting up $25,000 at a town meeting in order to pay for the person that, that found out that they were 2 feet off.
I believe that in this case, there probably is not a lot of leeway to have FEMA look at it again. But again, I don't think in this case, it's the same type of construct. And so instead of arguing that a methodology doesn't work in our marsh environment, this would be an argument against everything that FEMA has done to create the changes to the maps with respect to sea level rise and storm surge. So I think it's a different argument, I think it's a different animal, but to answer the question, I don't think there's much leeway at this point in time to have FEMA look at it again.
But you're going to confirm that with the gentleman at DCR? Right, okay, thank you. We will revisit this at our meeting on the 19th with that information. Any other comments or questions on the floodplain overlay changes? All right. Moving on to the 4th article. And you can see on the correction sheet, we will not be adding the word "as," and Mr. Guerin had referenced this before. In that sentence in 6-7.1, erection of more than one principal structure on a lot, the first sentence says more than one structure which is housing a permitted or permissible use. And that is, I guess, a verb there saying that the structure is housing the use, not that the structure is housing, which would be with a capital H. So that's not going to be part of the bylaw change. We're not changing anything in the existing language outside of capitalizing bylaw. There at the end of the first paragraph, what is the change that's being proposed here is to add a sentence at the very end of this section that says, all limitations and requirements of this section shall also apply to single-family and/or two-family condominium dwellings on common lots. This is just to clarify that the same standard of lot size and number of dwellings or principal structures on that lot will apply for situations where the lot stays common and the buildings are sold separately as condominiums. The reason for that is this system of the method of making condo properties on a common lot is a way that essentially bypasses the town's subdivision requirements, and with the intent that we have, as Mr. Guerin talked about earlier, the intent of section 6-7 allowing more than one principal structure on a lot was done to allow people to build homes on a large enough lot, and that's kind of the standard that Essex had wanted to achieve. And the condoing single-family buildings on a lot can get around that. So what this would do is make condos also comply to the same standards that we would apply to other dwellings. And if you want to do more than that, then it's a subdivision. So this is just to clarify the to capture the condo use. Planning board, any questions or comments on that? Members of the public?
Just that I think it should be spelled out again, instead of saying to all single-family and two-family condominium dwellings. Because, I mean, I can put 3 duplexes on a condo lot. I can legally, but I can't with regard to this bylaw. What I think you should do is repeat, provided that they house in the aggregate no more than 3 dwelling units, to add that under the condo section. That way, we're sticking to 3 dwelling units, plus Valerie's extra ADU. Just teasing. So if it's spelled out, then there's not gonna be a question what that means.
Correct. No, that's a good point. And we will adjust that accordingly. Thank you. Other questions, comments on that? Moving to the 5th article, which is deleting in entirety the language that is in the bylaw regarding the temporary moratorium on business and industrial conversions. And that was put in place in 2001 and was extended twice. And the language lives in the bylaw until such time, or the moratorium expired on the 1st of January 2025. We're not going to be able to extend it again. The Attorney General's office has made that clear on our second extension that that was the last time we were going to do it. So right now, the language for the temporary moratorium is in the bylaw, and we basically need to just take a vote to remove that language from the bylaw because it's no longer applicable. And the fact that it shows up in there, even though the expiration date of January 1st, 2025 is there, it's confusing and misleading to have that sort of live. So this is just, again, a housekeeping kind of thing, deleting that, that language from the bylaw. Questions, comments? Public questions, comments? All right. The 6th article is to see if the town will vote to amend the town zoning bylaws for section 6-3.4.4, which is the general use zoning district, adding the additional regulations as shown below. So the additional regulation that we're proposing is to put a buffer requirement on properties where a change of use takes place, where a new business or commercial or industrial use is proposed. So the language reads, expanded or new business, commercial, and industrial uses in the general use district which abut any existing residential use shall include a planted and/or fenced buffer adequate to visually screen the business, commercial, or industrial use from the abutting residential use. Said buffer shall be located on the business, commercial, or industrial property. It's been suggested that the location of the buffer could be flexible and agreed upon by both parties if there's a more appropriate place, if there's more room on the residential property, that some agreement could be made. So we'll work on language for that. But the intent is, because we don't have residential zoning districts, and we do have a lot of residential properties in our general use district, that new properties where a new business or a new commercial industrial use is proposed, that this would at least provide a buffer between that proposed use and an existing residential use. Questions, comments? Planning board members?
No.
Members of the public, questions, comments? Seeing none, we will move on to the 7th and final article. I didn't miss anything, did I? No, okay. So we're looking to, provide a clarification in the downtown district. So right now, the downtown district reads, under permitted principal uses, reads that one of them is residential, and it says dwelling units and apartments as part of mixed use. And the clarification here is that multifamily dwelling units or apartments as residential use only, with 3 or 4 by right and 5 or more by special permit, or as mixed use, see item 4 below. This is to clarify for the state, who is reviewing our MBTA compliance. They questioned whether multifamily dwellings had to be part of mixed use in the downtown district, and the answer to that is that multifamily dwellings do not have to be part of mixed use and can be standalone. So the intent of this language is to clarify that multifamily dwellings can be standalone. So that's, it's really just clarifying what is the intent of the bylaw. And mixed use is still allowed, so you have commercial with residential, but the state wanted to be clear that residential alone as multifamily is allowed, which is the case. So that's what this language is working to clarify. Planning board members, any questions, comments? Members of the public?
Just one comment. The mixed use and your 5 or more units, if it can be all residential, residential requires a different, in one case that I can think of, different amount of parking spaces versus a mixed use. And has that been looked at by the board? So I may need 1 parking space per bedroom versus 1.5 for a mixed use.
Correct.
I'm sorry, 1.5, 1 for mixed use, 1.5 for all residents.
Right.
So is that part of this change, or is that gonna stay the way it is? So if you're a mixed use, you can have half a parking space less, and if you're not a mixed use, you have to have 1.5.
That's the way things stand right now.
And that's what this would be as well?
This isn't intended to change anything about the parking regulations. This is just to clarify that. To just address parking, we are going to, as part of working through some changes in the bylaw, we are going to revisit the downtown district and parking in general, the whole schmeal.
Thank you.
Because a lot of the standard parking regulations that apply in the general use district and then everywhere else in Essex aren't really suitable for the downtown district. So we're gonna be working on that. So this will come up as part of that too, looking at mixed use residential and commercial, just to find out what's appropriate. So, but not now.
Judd Lane, 21 Lanes Road. I'm good with everything we've done so far. I wanted to, you mentioned you're going to have another public hearing for another couple of
Correct.
articles, and that's on the 19th at 7 here?
So we're going to, the schedule for that is we're gonna be talking about, and I will talk about those other 2 articles now, just to be completely transparent and clear, because we're gonna talk about them when we close the public hearing anyway. We're going to finalize the language for those 2 at our meeting on the 19th, so that we
Okay.
can convey it to the selectmen to sign on the warrant on the 24th. We will be holding the public hearing, which is a state requirement for bylaw changes, on April 16th.
16th, okay.
So, and if the changes that we make to the 7 articles we talked about tonight are considered substantial enough that we should revisit them, we'll do that again at that hearing, but we'll be checking that with town council.
Okay, so you're going to mention them tonight, what you're planning?
Yeah, so the other 2 articles that we're going to be talking about one is for a parcel on Southern Avenue. So I'm sure everyone's familiar with the 4 Allen properties that were recently sold as a group, essentially. There is one, the southernmost one, which is 11 Southern Avenue, is a property that's about 66 feet wide and 33 feet deep and doesn't have a building on it right now. And that tiny little property was excluded from the downtown district. And looking back at the Harriman report that was done for the planning board when they developed the downtown district, that report had that little corner clipped out. And I spoke to both Wesley Burnham and to Kim Drake, who were the former chairs of the planning board when the downtown district was put into place, and they acknowledged that it was certainly not the intent to keep one of those 4 Allen parcels separate from the other 3. So the bylaw change that we would be proposing is to simply move those 2 property lines from that, just to reconfigure the downtown district at that one little corner, so that all 4 properties would be in the downtown district. So basically, it's taking literally a property that's 33 feet wide by 66 feet, which doesn't conform to anything ever anywhere, and putting it in the downtown district so that it can be used with the other 3 Allen properties to do some kind of a development in that area. So It's sort of a housekeeping thing that would have made sense to have just kept the square off that corner rather, because right now it does this little jog, and we're just kind of squaring it off. And we'll have a map for that, too. So that's one article. And then the other article that we're going to be talking about is, again, in the downtown district, talking again about the mixed-use properties. And the downtown district is the only area in town where mixed use is permitted by right, which means that you can have a building that has both a business and a residential use in the same structure. And that was one of the reasons for creating the downtown district, is to allow those mixed use by right, because downtown we want to try and keep as a commercial area, a walkable commercial area, but still allow residences above. So what's not clarified right now as far as mixed use goes is what is sort of a minimum business component to mixed use would be appropriate. We had, just as context, someone who was looking at the bed and breakfast that's down further, the George Fuller House on Main Street, and they wanted to redevelop the property as multifamily, and we're talking about putting in a gallery that would be about like 9 by 12 or 8 by 10, whatever they said, and then build out the rest of the property fully to the zoning requirements or the zoning limitations, as they were looking at 7 townhouse units with just this token commercial space. And if you look at the bylaw, the setbacks for a multifamily in the downtown district are a lot larger than the setbacks for mixed use. And the intent of that was to encourage mixed use, because if you do mixed use, you get to use more of your property. But nowhere is mixed use defined as the first floor or 600 square feet or some number that gives a reasonable commercial use in the building that's getting these advantage of having these small setbacks to allow the commercial use. So what we want to try and do is to build some language in that says either your whole first floor or 50% of your first floor or some square footage or a percentage of the lot. So we're going to be talking about what is appropriate there. It is likely that we will go with something like the first floor, and excuse me. And if it becomes a point of debate on town meeting floor, we can always put in something that's less restrictive, so we can say half the first floor if there's pushback on that. But I do think that, in general, people are supportive of the idea of mixed use and promoting the viable business community in our downtown district. And we want to make sure that essentially developers don't come in and try and take advantage of our mixed use setbacks and only put in sort of a token effort at a commercial space in there. So that's the other article that we'll be talking about this evening some and finalizing on the 19th. And that wasn't officially part of the public hearing, but in the interest of letting everyone know what's going on here, that's what we're looking at. So those will be the 8th and 9th articles that the planning board will be bringing to town meeting. Before we close the hearing, are there any other comments, questions from planning board members or members of the public? It wouldn't be.
Will you take written comment after tonight's meeting till you decide?
Can you come to the microphone? Sorry, I just want to make sure.
Just, will you take written comment between now and the next meeting when you make your decision?
Will we take comment?
Additional comment after you close the hearing, will you take anything in writing? When I got here tonight, part of the reason is that I never saw the floodplain language until tonight. I never saw the maps until tonight.
Right.
And it was kind of hard to prepare for a public hearing without any of that in hand.
Okay. No, I mean, we're a public board and we allow public comment at all of our meetings and we welcome input. We would rather have the conversations ahead of town meeting and work things out. So even though, public comment is official at the hearing, we're certainly willing to work with members of the public. Excuse me. Go ahead.
Thanks. Tom Lang, 18 Eastern Ave. And this is just hearing about the George Fuller House, because we have the Historic Commission here. Is what you spoke about and the requirements for mixed use, is that time sensitive to what's happening with the George Fuller House? If this gets into the town meeting and whatever is determined, is this imminent that the George Fuller House is going to convert the way you're?
That proposal came to us about a year ago, and
Okay.
those buyers went away.
Okay.
But
good.
that sort of brought to our attention when the gentleman sat in our meeting, said 8 by 10 area, and we'll call it a gallery. Wink, wink. So to us, it was kind of bypassing the intent of the bylaw.
Reactive but proactive. Good. Thank you.
Yeah, we know nothing more about that property at this time. Anything else? Nope. So I will take a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Simone moves, second.
Second?
Peter, second. All those in favor? Aye. Thank you. So that concludes the public hearing. We will be continuing our meeting. People are welcome to stay or go back to your normal life. Thank you, everyone, for coming. It's nice to see people interested and engaged in our processes. If folks could take your chit chat out in the hall, that'd be awesome. We're gonna put them with town clerk's office, and I can print more if we need, but town clerk is where she's. So, just to recap, based on what we've heard this evening, during the public hearing,
Necessary to be, never mind.
what's that? Won't be making, well, we're gonna be working with town council, Teresa will, as far as the document that would highlight all the changes that we're making for the non-substantive edits.
For what?
Yeah.
We lost a member.
Huh?
We lost a member. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear your question.
What's that? I'm
I
sorry.
couldn't hear what you said.
Teresa is gonna be working on the document that will capture all of the non-substantive formatting changes and things like that. So, yeah, no, I know you're on it. It's a lot. But we'll also be working with town council as to how to present and make that available publicly for review ahead of town meeting. On ADUs, I think the next step for ADUs, and Val, you're still there. I'm sorry? Okay.
Yep.
She's still there. She's still there.
Yeah. So Val, you heard the comments on ADUs tonight, and also talking about
Setback?
I'm sorry?
Yeah,
So what I would like to do is work with you on revising this and adding those sections so that we can share that with the planning board members and then talk about the updates to this at the 19th. I don't, unless anyone has comments or changes that you want to talk about now, but it seems like getting a next draft of this with the additional requirements makes the most sense moving forward.
We should go over whether or not we allow nonconformities to continue, right? I think the idea was originally not to allow that. But I think John's point was that we should be super clear about.
Oh,
Actually, do
we're not used to this, sorry, Joan.
No, I think the point from the gentleman that brought up earlier is that we should be really clear about the language. So whether or not we allow the nonconformity to increase or not should be something that we talk about as well. I think the idea was that the ADU is supposed to be purely conforming, right? So if you have a
Yeah.
nonconforming situation, you can't just extend that nonconformity.
I think his point was that the language says both the zoning and the house. And he's saying if you have a house that's pre-existing, non-conforming, you shouldn't say the and the house. So I think if the intent of the board is to go with the setbacks that are in the zoning, to just say the zoning.
Right. But I think, yeah, we'll not talk about principal dwelling, just say the zoning district. But
Yeah.
what we do need to talk about is, if you have a house that is non-conforming and you want to put on an in-law apartment and extend that non-conformity, is that okay or not?
You mean an ADU?
I'm sorry?
You said in-law apartment, but I think you meant ADU.
Right, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, isn't an in-law apartment an ADU, I guess, but,
No.
yeah, technically an ADU, but, so the question is whether we want to allow that by right, extending that nonconformity, or whether we want to straight out disallow it, which if someone wanted to do that, then they would end up in front of the ZBA. Or do we want to say that if you intend to extend an existing nonconformity, but not increase that nonconformity, that would be through a special permit. We could make that, we could require special permit for extending a nonconformity on an existing structure, the same way that we're talking about requiring a special permit if you want to turn an accessory building that's not a dwelling unit into an accessory dwelling unit, and doing that through the special permit. So that's the barn that's 10 foot off your lot line.
Yep.
Because I think it's a slippery slope to just blanket allow the extension of an existing nonconformity. That we usually do those on a case-by-case basis when we look at extending. You know, if someone comes to us with a non-conforming structure and wanting to extend that, we look at it on a case-by-case basis. And, you know, people say that historically an existing non-conformity has always been allowed to be extended if it's not increased. But that's not anything other than what has been done. And, you know, I'm not entirely certain myself that that's always a good approach. I mean, we saw a situation where a non-conforming deck was allowed to be built into an addition and blocked someone else's view. So I think we need to have the control over the situation without allowing it sort of just by right.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yep.
And also Essex is already unique compared to most communities in that we allow essentially the conversion to a two-family. So that's, whether it's an apartment or an ADU, it's irrelevant
Right.
in some cases,
Yeah, in some cases, because, yeah, I mean,
most actually.
because two-family is by right here, so you could build a whole nother half a house and you wouldn't even have to comply to the 900 square foot
Right.
limitations.
And if a portion of that happened to extend an existing nonconformity, then I think that should be at least reviewed as we normally would.
Right.
Because I'm not sure which project you were referring to, but I know at least one on my street where, you know, the end of the street was all upset over someone extending a building, calling an old shed footprint when it really wasn't, and that sort of thing. So it's, you know, as we all know, people will try to push as much as they can to get what they want,
Right.
push the rules, that is.
And I think that special permit is appropriate for that, so that we can consider it and look at, you know, we just did the special permit for 145 Main.
Right. Good example.
And we recognize that, yes, there is an existing nonconformity, and we allowed them to extend it because it seems reasonable, but there may be situations where it's not. So I think it's appropriate that a 7-member elected board would review those kind of situations.
And the most affected neighbor in that situation didn't show up. So clearly they didn't have any issue
Exactly,
with it.
yeah,
They're the
the-
ones on the southern side of it, or rather, yeah,
Yeah,
the ones that would be in shadow, so,
right,
right.
yeah, they did not object,
Right.
so.
Yeah, I think that that would be consistent with the regulations, because as long as you're not doing something more stringent than you would for a regular extension of a single family or two-family in this case, you wouldn't be in, like, out of step with the regulations and the new state law, so it's a totally reasonable approach.
So in that case of the two-family, or the one family that adds a two-family, then adds an accessory dwelling unit, they can do that too.
So for
Well-
a property that has an existing two-family,
An existing one-family
Right.
that they extend to a two-family, then they could also, in addition, do an accessory.
Right. That's how I see it.
But isn't this just addressing accessory right now? We're only looking at the
Yep.
accessory dwelling unit right now.
Yes,
In
I know, I was
terms of-
just asking a question.
Okay.
so Val, you and I will get together via email and work on that, and have something to send around to planning board members in advance of the next meeting, and we can try to finalize the changes to the language on the 19th. Floodplain overlay district, we're going to wait and see what Brendan gets back to us on regarding that. For the condo, we'll rework that language likely to suggest that there's no more than 3 dwelling units on a condo property, which is the intent of that section 6-7.1. That said, it's section 6-7.1, erection of more than one principal structure on a lot, to me has always had a confusing feel about it, and it is something that, not for this town meeting, but I do want to work on that and try and provide more clarity and guidance in that section. So that will be a future project. Moratorium is straightforward. The buffer, doesn't sound like we'll have changes on that. And then the others, the last one, that's a clarification there. So then the only other thing we really need to talk about.
Lisa, though, on the buffer, though, were we adding a definition for buffer? Did we already have that?
Oh,
And we were gonna potentially add in some language for, maybe it could be on the other abutter's property or,
right,
right?
yeah,
But were we ever doing a definition? I don't know where we ever left with that one.
we had,
We had one definition in the bylaw, but it was in a different section, and if so,
yeah,
does
it
that
was
have
in,
to
it
be
was in
part
a
of the
different
article?
section that defined what the buffer was. So I think it's appropriate to put it in definitions, like add a definition to the definition section.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. And that'll go in the same article it'll just drop it into the definition section. We're not gonna add an article for that. Thank you, Matt. I'm glad you reminded me of that. So then the other one we want to talk about is what would be appropriate for a limitation, a minimum commercial allotment on a mixed-use property in the downtown district. When, when people talk about the mixed use, they're thinking of a building that has, a shop on the first floor and an apartment or two upstairs. And that was sort of the pattern that was intended with it. So you look at, like, Pike Marine has their shop on the first floor and there's an apartment upstairs, that kind of thing. And that was the intent of it, not what we saw when the guy came in talking about George Fuller House and just putting that token commercial spot in. So is saying the whole first floor, is that sound overly restrictive, or 50% of the first floor, or is there a number? It's hard to put a number on it just because there are, we see down around on the other side of Richdale, some of the small shops down there. To put a number on a square footage feels,
Might not work.
yeah, it might not work, because there are gonna be some properties that are much larger. Like if you look at where, the Coughlin's property where Nancy Larson Jewelry Design is, where they actually have ample parking, that's a much bigger lot. So to say, a square footage there, it's putting a number on it that's a square footage, whether it's 1,000 square feet or whatever, it doesn't feel appropriate because there are so many different sized lots in the area.
So it probably should be a percentage, right?
Yeah, so it would be,
Doesn't have to be on the first floor. I mean, it could also be just a percentage of the building. Doesn't necessarily have to be on the first floor.
correct.
I mean, if you had a dentist office upstairs and
True.
convenience store on the first floor.
That's a good point.
But the goal is to have like a walkable town and
Right.
have retail and shops and stuff on the first floor, residential above. And I think to get the more favorable setbacks, I think that commercial space should be, because we're gonna see everyone converting everything to residential.
That's
because
right. If they're gonna take advantage of the mixed use, sort of setbacks, like you're saying, then it should all be commercial on that ground floor, I think. 100%.
100% ground floor commercial.
Save for
Yeah.
elevators, stairs,
Right,
Access.
back of house.
utility,
Right.
Right.
Bill
The-
brought that up at the last meeting, but I think there should be something in there to say, well, clearly you can get to the second
Access.
floor.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We'll allow you space to get upstairs, but, and heat it.
Right.
But not a massive lobby.
Hmm?
I'm not sure I agree that
No?
it's all first floor.
This is
I mean, it's
Maybe not
still
all first floor,
walkable.
but-
It's still walkable if it's on the second
I
floor.
don't know, I'd rather see more shops than a dentist office
Likewise.
on the second floor,
But I don't think we have a choice, right?
Well, we kind of do if we're saying that this has to,
I'm talking about dentist office. We don't have the.
oh, no. No,
The
they-
dentist office could be on the ground floor too.
So we're saying our commercial can't be on the second floor?
no? You're not
No, I
limiting
think it
commercial at
can.
all?
I think we're just trying to restrict residential on the ground floor, is really what we're trying to do. If they're gonna take advantage of the mixed-use benefits, right?
Right.
Okay, but so let's say this, I want to do an accessible unit on the first floor, so I don't have to have an elevator, and I want to do commercial. I just think eliminating that possibility has certain issues with it, and that's kind of what this does. While I think we could still meet the requirements and not eliminate the possibility that somebody with an accessibility issue would be able to have a unit and a commercial space, just like anybody else.
I agree with that in theory, but does that put someone into putting 5 residential accessible units on the first
Well,
floor
that's what I'm saying,
to
if it's-
bypass the commercial, you know what I mean? It's a can of worms.
I think as long as they have the percentage of commercial,
Mhm.
it's still meeting the intent of shared commercial and, like, I don't know what percentage we come up with,
Right.
but
I haven't had a chance to look at this, like other communities, someone must have
Mhm.
tackled this.
do you have a question?
I don't know.
John?
Val, do you have any suggestions for us on this?
I think John might have a question.
I think the intent usually is to have the commercial on the first floor, as was referenced by the other planning board member. Perhaps you would go by special permit if somebody wanted to put residential on the first floor and have a mixed use, because that's not something that you want to encourage. That might be one way to go about it. I think I agree that having the whole first floor may be more than you need in some cases, so maybe you would say that the majority of the first floor, meaning 51%,
Or
is
street-facing.
commercial.
You're saying 50%, 51% of the first floor commercial?
I mean,
Yeah.
we could say street-facing. If it was street-facing, so that you're getting this commercial frontage,
Right.
the rear could be residential, and that doesn't shift the perspective of, walkable
Well,
city.
Right, that allows them to have mixed use on the first floor if it's large enough.
You know, not being completely familiar with building code, but you almost price yourself out from putting a commercial business on the second floor anyway, right? Because you gotta have ramps.
Elevators.
Yeah, elevators, so they're, so you
Or
kind
big
of,
Oh, accessibility.
accessibility, so you start to
Right.
push yourself out of putting, but that's not saying that you couldn't.
Yeah, we don't want to say you can't do it, but no one will do it because of
Cost.
the cost, if they can put
Right.
it on the first floor. John, you're twitching. What's in your mind?
Well, I'm listening too, because I think you haven't decided yet either what's right, but my 2 cents, my first thought was what Simone said. When this bylaw was passed, it talked about mixed uses. It didn't define where, how, when, what, and I know you're feeling like you need to now, but, I'll give you my example. I'm grandfathered, so I'm not worried about this, but mixed use to me was, during the day, it was my office, where I sat and did closings. I had an office in the basement, or the ground floor, I'd call it. And at nighttime or on the weekends, that same table may end up being a dining table. That was a real mixed use. And it wasn't necessarily home occupation. It was a true mixed-use property. And I thought the idea was, as somebody leaves for work, and one of your parking problems downtown is that lives there is gonna leave an empty parking space for the guy who does work there and drives in and comes, and regardless of what floor they're on. And it's hard to do a percentage unless you're gonna go out and measure every single building and say, okay, I got 3 units there and I've got 1 unit, does it have to be 1 floor? Or, and I didn't imagine Essex was gonna be turned into this, they say walkable, a Rockport, Bearskin Neck, with little shops on the ground floor, when, most of the houses in the downtown district are already there. We're not talking about new construction unless they're gonna tear down Tom Shay's and that kind of a place. So I'm spitballing because that's what I hear you doing as well.
Right.
And just my perspective from living here in town, and owning property downtown, and I don't know how you're gonna decide that and how I even feel about it yet, other than the fact that I have handicapped accessible first floors, and sometimes that means housing. Show me some handicapped accessible first floors in town for housing. There's not a lot, and unless people are gonna be putting in ramps and doing all sorts of other things. So housing is just as important on the first floor as a business.
So in listening to you, it sounds like this should be something that is maybe delayed and there's more discussion on the intent of the downtown district and looking a lot more carefully at the impacts of some of these different suggestions that are coming up.
As long, as long as you don't go out and spend $100,000 on a study when we can do what we're doing now without going there.
Well,
But-
I would like to put something out there, simply because we know there's a lot of property turning over downtown. And we sat and listened to this developer who basically told us he's gonna cram as much housing on it and put in a token commercial space. And we know that someone has looked at Shays and decided against it, but they were talking about tearing everything down on the Shays Motel, restaurant property and putting in 11 high-end condos with parking on the first floor with a pile-supported structure because the property floods. So,
But
you know,
we
that-
can't actually say they can't do that because of the MBTA communities, isn't that true? Isn't it by right? You could do a multifamily, we're just looking at that.
you could do a multifamily by right. Yes, you can do a
In which
multifamily by right.
case,
But
even if it's in a mixed-use district, but they can't get the setbacks then.
correct.
Right.
If you're doing strictly multifamily, you have a certain set of setbacks. The whole mixed use was giving, to encourage mixed use was having much smaller setbacks.
Yeah.
So we're not prohibiting
So
multifamily at all.
could we only allow the reduced setback for the actual mixed-use portion of the first floor? So in other words, if I want to build a house on my first floor and a commercial, I think probably we need to,
With second floor decks around everything? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know, you know,
But I
I think
think
there's a
it's gonna
lot
be
of
like
things, and I
columns
think
or-
people are gonna try a lot of different things, and so,
And we're trying to avoid people doing the token, you know, something that's gonna end up being a janitor's closet or just an empty space, and they're just gonna write it off because they wanna get the housing around everything else.
Right.
but I mean, I think we could do a percentage that's not just so restrictive, I mean.
Well, what about something, instead of talking about, of the, because this is all sort of predicated on setbacks. So you have this, you can go as close as 7 feet to the lot line for your mixed use.
Right.
So your front setback, sorry, your front setback is the 7, minimum front yard for business, for mixed use, and for single family is 7 to 25 feet. For residential multifamily is 50 feet. So what if that difference was, I'm trying to say whatever area that you gained because of being mixed use by having smaller setbacks. So instead of being 50 feet back, you can be 7 feet back. So you've gained,
You just
A
don't want res-
ratio, a ratio.
You could,
of-
like you're saying, proportional to the amount of commercial in the building by some ratio, like if you have 3/4 of it as a mixed use, then you can get 3/4 of the setback.
I mean, that's one way to look at it. I was thinking of the area that you gain by being mixed use would need to be, or I'm just, like John said, spitballing, but the area that you gain by having a 7-foot setback instead of a 50-foot setback, that area would be the commercial component of it.
Right.
Commercial percentage
So
component,
the
or,
portion that wants to be residential has to go back to the 50-foot line.
That makes sense,
wait,
except if-
so now,
except if you have an existing building that you're
Right.
converting.
Yeah, right. That won't work.
so, but are you suggesting that that's a ratio of commercial to residential in that scenario?
It's a ratio or just something that, you know, almost like, you know, how you prove out the OSRD versus the conventional subdivision is, like, if you were doing just residential on that property, here's what you would have, but because you're mixed use, here's what you have, and what is the difference in available area, and 50% of that gain needs to be commercial. That sounds like freaking
That
capital,
feels-
excuse my French.
I mean,
Why are we still recording?
What's that?
Why are we still doing that?
Is what?
because we're always recording.
You're-
Oh,
Yeah.
recording?
Isn't the public hearing over?
The public hearing's over, but the
I didn't
meeting
real- I
was
didn't realize we
recorded, so.
recorded this as well.
Hmm?
I didn't realize we recorded our meeting as well.
Well, when we did, just because the public hearing was recorded, so.
We could stop.
Huh?
We could stop
I
recording.
thought we usually did. Right now,
When we're in the critical moment of decision-making.
Well, it's an open meeting, so,
I think in order to look at that, we'd have to have an idea of what we're talking about there. Like, does that force the building into, like, what is the average that creates,
yeah, what are the numbers around that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I can, and, because I can look at that, because if you look at the side yard setback for business, residential, and mixed use is a 6-foot side yard setback, and residential multifamily is a 30-foot side yard setback, which is substantial.
Yeah.
So by being mixed use, you're gaining a whole lot of territory. That
But
some
maybe-
component should be dedicated commercial of that gain.
I mean, maybe anything that doesn't conform to those setbacks just pushes it to special permit then, right? What's wrong with that? Like we did with the Main Street property. Obviously, that was all non-conforming pretty much, right? Or two sides of it were, so.
Everything about that was not
Right.
conforming except the back.
So it's like a special case, so we look at it, and I just want to be careful with the blanket, kind of, okay, anybody can do this, and then somebody clever is going to figure out a way to get what they want and maybe not adhere to the spirit of the bylaws.
Right.
They certainly will, kind of like the way they figured out how to do 2 stories out on Canoma, when that was a bylaw that was clearly written to
Right.
make it cottage-like and not really have a second floor. And then we have,
Second floors.
second floors, with a rake board as your,
With decks.
roof line as your, roof height.
Lisa?
Yep.
Excuse me. Could you recognize new construction versus pre-existing? And because the downtown district's pretty full, and you'd be talking about, anything you're talking about and what you're worried about them gaining, everybody's already got, if they're not gonna take down the buildings that they have.
Right.
So as far as the percentages and what you're gonna gain and this and that from a mixed use, if they turn a house into a mixed use, they're not moving the building. It's gonna be the same thing, it's just depending on what they're doing inside. So I'm not sure what they're gaining in that case, and so I would hope we could differentiate. We're talking about new construction or reconstruction or extension of construction as opposed to pre-existing.
Right. That makes sense, because, yeah, if the existing buildings would,
Would have no gain.
right,
They're already non-conforming.
they're already, yeah,
Almost all of them.
right. Val, were you gonna say something?
Well, I'm still thinking that it's worth taking the time to do it right, and playing with it a little bit, but I don't know how much I can do in 2 weeks. I can certainly look to see where there's other communities that have something similar that might have some kind of a ratio for new construction. I think that's a great suggestion. I think you're still having to look at the question of how much commercial use you're going to require and where. within even an existing building that doesn't seem clear. So I'll do what I can, but I think it would be better, if, in an ideal world, to spend some time on it over the coming months and come maybe to the fall. But I realize it's not an ideal world.
Okay, well, you and I are gonna catch up and talk anyway, so
Yeah.
we'll talk about that too.
Because these are all good points.
Hmm?
Everybody's raising some very good points.
Any other thoughts?
I mean, ultimately, I feel like the percentage allows the most flexibility to achieve what we're trying to achieve. You know, we just don't want it to be this little hole in the wall, so we want some reasonable percentage of commercial use to be able to do anything as a mixed use. Because
You're
if it becomes-
saying not saying whether it's on the first floor, the second floor, the front or the back or whatever, it's just a net.
well, I think maybe we want our percentage to be on the frontage, but
Let's talk it through, because I mean, I have some ideas on how we could try to approach it, looking at what you actually have. Since, Lisa, you've done so much work on already identifying the business uses in that area as part of that larger project that you've been doing to look at zoning. I think we have a lot of information available to us, and there could be some information I can put together in a relatively short period of time that would help us make some of these decisions at the next meeting.
Okay. We do have all that information collected for, well, every property, so.
Exactly.
Okay.
Just that being said, though, you also don't want to create commercial, spots that are never going to get used, right?
yeah.
So if you create this big, if you use a percentage of, the gross square foot, well, that's going to be basically the whole first floor. If you said 25% and you have a 3-story building in downtown, right, that's going to be the whole first floor. So who's going to occupy that, right?
Yeah.
Small businesses are hard enough to interject into especially in Essex, which really isn't a walking community.
I really think it's important to look at what you have, and exactly to his point, that you may not want a percentage that is, that affects a certain size building. You might want to you got to look at what you have for housing stock and building stock, and look at how a percentage might affect certain buildings, and you might want to say that at a certain scale, you're going to change that percentage to something smaller. I think it's really important to look at what you have.
It could be a percentage of the first floor.
Right.
Doesn't
Like
have
the
to be,
footprint or something.
yeah,
Mhm.
doesn't
The
have to be
existing
the whole
footprint.
building.
Yeah, that's what I was imagining.
Yeah.
What's that?
That's what I was imagining, whether it was the whole first floor or a percentage of
Yeah.
the first floor. I wouldn't base it on gross.
Because it's
Yeah.
not like we're
Footage.
trying to force,
Either.
like 145 Main, we didn't force them to put a retail in there, right? Because it was always residential, so it's sort of, that goes into play. Like that pink house, it seems like it's falling apart, right? If somebody were to want to tear that down and put a new house there, it's been residential for God knows how many years. But
Right.
let's say that gas station, for example, that's empty, right?
Next to the brewery.
Right.
Yeah.
If that were to be developed, I would hate to see it be just all residential on the ground floor. Like, to me, that's a great opportunity for some retail that could really work.
But
But
one,
theoretically, they could build all multifamily or
On top.
whatever.
Right.
But I mean, they could do just residential if they want, as long as they meet the setbacks.
Oh, as long as they do the setbacks.
So, which kind of creates a hole in and of itself anyway.
I think that pink house was actually a kid's store at one point.
Was it? Okay. Oh, it was, okay. There you go.
But
Pretty
clear-
much every-
clearly at one time, we're
Write it down.
Never know it, but.
But, yeah, I mean, look at what's there now, but I don't know that, I also feel like we could project what would be, you know, a nicer version of what's existing in terms of, you know, I don't know, what it comes out to be. I don't know that it needs to be matching what's now. It could also project into the future of what we think. I also don't know that we need to say it's all on the front, because of the nature of the marsh and its beauty, you know, people might want it to be in the back, because that is, you know,
The retail, you mean?
retail, yeah, especially if I'm doing a restaurant or a cafe, and I wanna
Well,
look out onto the marsh.
that gas station building, I mean, that was the beer garden out back there. They built the whole patio out during COVID, out behind there to take advantage of the marsh. And, you know, if you look at CK O'Shea's, you know, the street front isn't, you know, you want to be on the backside, you want to be on the river.
Mhm. But there is an element of it that is, you know, the kind of character of Essex, in which I may live and have my workspace, like John's talking about, and how that plays out and where that is. I don't wanna necessarily restrict that in some artificial format, but anyway, that's.
I think the kind of development that you want to encourage is like the Cape Ann Sup, maybe
Right.
not the design in per se, but you know, they live upstairs, they have, you know,
Yeah,
the shop on the first floor.
but I
And that's
also
great.
can't tell that. In other words, when I drive by Cape Ann Sup, I don't know where their residential is in there, like, if I
Right.
haven't ever been in it.
Right.
So just because they put it on the second